So I've structured some of these sections within this course, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in that order for you. And the reason I say that is I want to talk about budget now. And you might think, well, budget has to come after this and has to come before that. It doesn't. Any one of these sections can run concurrently with the others. So it's not like you do this one and then you do this one and then you do this one. They'll often be running in parallel. So with that in mind, I'm talking about budget now. Like, how much is your adventure going to cost? Now, if you're one person and you're going to go off on your expedition, you may want to pay for that yourself and just get going. You don't need any exterior source of finance. But if you've got a slightly bigger production, you might want to think, what sort of number do you need to make this happen? Certain costs are generically fixed. The price of a camera person, prices of editors, there's industry rates. But for an adventure travel documentary, what you need to sort of do is think out of the box a little bit, but you do want to come up with a number. There are certain factors above the line, let's say your talent, where you need to sit down with them and actually say, okay, what do you want for this? And there's a discussion to be had there, which can also link back to the idea in its origins, because you may want to share the ownership of the entity of your show, the intellectual property right, with somebody. And that's a discussion that you can have with your talent or the people, who are behind the project. And that's just worth talking about. Everybody else would tend to get paid a fee on the project, and therefore you can calculate that. But because it's an adventure travel show, it can go off track. You might decide this story isn't good enough, or this has dropped out, or you got caught somewhere and you have to fly people back. So you have to think about these contingencies in that budget and make sure that it's big enough so that if somebody says yes to it and gives you that amount of money, you can deliver it for that. Because if you get halfway through the project or your trip and you've run out of money, then what do you do? When you put your budget together, I think it's important to put the worst case budget together. What's the most amount of money that you might need to make this happen without being completely crazy? And in that sense, you might want to get somebody in who's an expert, because there's so many facets to the budget where you may not be allowing enough. For instance, if we'll talk about music later, but if you're going to get music commissioned or buy commercial music, the clearances of that could be much more expensive than you think. And therefore, to have somebody with an eye to that sort of detail and come up with the number that you're looking for. And in that sense as well, we were discussing this later about getting commissioned, depending on the number of episodes that you've got, that will give you an idea of what you seek per episodes. Because a lot of broadcasters will have a tariff per episode, and it's interesting to see if you'll fit into that. There are many templates on sort of production-orientated websites that you can download that you can use as the basis of your budget, which helps enormously because there's just small areas that you just might not think of. But with experience, you start to learn. But at the beginning, you want to get that right. The reason I say that you might want your worst case budget is if you have to pay for everything. But over the years, and in fact, I started off this way at the very beginning, I've always sought sponsorship with our expeditions. And that's something you might want to think about. So historically, you may be able to get certain hotels for free, flights for free, and other things that you need to budget for. But of course, you might get free of charge because somebody might want you to tell a story or stay in a certain place. And why am I saying that? Because under a normal traditional TV show, of course, you just pay for that. But we're in the business of making an adventure happen. And if you're a producer, sometimes you have to think left field as to how you're going to make this happen. If you can't make it happen using a completely traditional route, then you have to think out the box. That's my philosophy anyway, which is if I really want to do something, I'll find a way of making it happen and finding the money that I need to make it happen. And for me, that can range from book deals to DVD deals to sponsorship deals, tourism money. These are all income streams, which we'll talk about later, that can offset you having to find the hard cash. The only thing I would say is that you probably, depending on who your broadcaster is share that thought process with them. Because if they're going to get a show cheaper because you're getting some money from a tourism authority, they'll probably be fine with it. But you need to clear it with them first. So putting that budget together in your head is going, okay, this is the number I need to find. So when you go to a broadcaster, that's what you can ask for. You might want to ask for more, so you're in a healthier position, but at least you do get your costs covered. And those costs have to go right to the end of delivering the show. Because sometimes when you do the final play out, they might want a different version of this, and you need to make sure that you've got all the money that goes from the beginning of the idea to the very, very end. So for me, there's a very interesting part of any adventure is the bit between the idea being formed and the first money coming in from your broadcast partner. Somebody has to fund that. Now, a lot of people will just do that bit free of charge because they're super enthusiastic and they want to make it work. But you may have to sort of fund certain things like teaser tapes or some people that are doing research to get the idea commissioned. Whoever comes in at that stage, to me, is a very valuable person because they've actually put their money up at a point where it may not happen. And you have to recognize that person if it's yourself or somebody else. And also agree with them how they get their money back after the money comes in, out of respect for them, out of respect for yourself. And that you just need to calculate that. Because sometimes when you get money in from a broadcast partner, it will come in from the beginning of the production. It doesn't always allow for the 6 months or 12 months that you fought hard to make your production work. So don't ever forget that bit or that person that's helped cash flow the project during that period, because that's the inception point where you keep fighting until it gets away. So I think it's important not to forget that. And in that sense, it's very important to have a cash flow forecast. And you might be thinking, look, I want to just think about adventure, Russ. And it's like, well, I am always thinking about the adventure, because you don't want to get halfway through it and you haven't got the money then to finance the next stage. So whenever you talk to whoever's bringing the money in, you want enough money in advance to hopefully pay off what's been accrued so far, but then enough to take you through all of the various periods without ever running out of money in your account. So making sure that you've got a good schedule or cash flow forecast is essential, and allowing in it enough money to solve problems should it happen on the trip. So there are certain elements within a production budget that of course you want to cater for with regard to an adventure, which could be broken cameras, shipping out sort of more drives because some have got lost, etc. So make sure you cut yourself enough slack. But I think there's a couple of key areas where adventure travel probably dictates a bit more spent on safety, courses that people should attend, facilities for helping people out if in a time of a crisis, and insurance. So we'll often have, without going into massive detail, enough policies running so that we're all looked after. So if anything should go wrong, even to the point of repatriation, your team feel like they can be extracted should it become necessary. Again, this comes back to the research area. You don't want to go into areas where that is an issue, but that might be what's floating your boat. That might be the adventure documentary you want to make. But making sure people are safe and you've got enough insurance in place so that if something does go wrong, at least gives you the safety blanket of being able to call upon people to help should you need them.